How's it going, guys? Today, I'm going to be featuring the Missouri, the Tier 7 Premium American Battleship that you can purchase in the store for 30,000 steel. Now, the Missouri is a ship that I've somewhat been thinking about if it was worth the 30,000 steel or not. Obtaining that much steel did take quite a while, and it was definitely a grind. It took about maybe a little over a year for me to get enough steel to purchase the Missouri after they started releasing the currency after you finish campaigns through arena, ranked, and other game modes, which for newer players this would definitely take quite a while, and for those average players they may not place in the top 1% of arena, and then also finishing outranked getting the most amount of steel that they could possibly earn. I already know that there were quite a bit of players that were frustrated with trying to obtain the Colbert. That was actually only for 3,000 steel. So if you really think about it, players can't even get 3,000 steel. So if they were actually able to grind 30,000, they had to put quite a bit of effort into it. Anyway, the Missouri's main selling point is the radar consumable because as of right now, this is the only battleship that has access to a radar, which does allow you to play the ship a bit more aggressively, which in this game, my build that I'm using is a full anti-air build, utilizing Kong with Andrew Cunningham and Angelo Iachino as my inspirations, having all of Kong's anti-air skills, and then in that legendary skill row, I'm actually using running with scissors. And one of the main reasons that I'm actually using this skill over will to rebuild or even fight fire with fire, well, I have been trying to move away from relying on will to rebuild, mainly because I despise that skill. I don't think it's something that should have ever been added into this game, at least in the way that it's currently implemented, allowing you to have an infinite amount of HP being restored as long as you're next to a teammate. The fact that it heals at the standard rate of 0.5% per second, that is basically a standard battleship heal, and what you're going to see later in this game, Wilter build absolutely ruins our chances of winning, and it honestly ruins a great XP game, but I will get into that later. So do I think the Missouri is worth it? I think my general answer will be no. I think there are other American battleships that are just simply better. Now, for the playstyle of the Missouri that I typically go for, which is a bit more aggressive, so I can push into objectives and make use of the radar, I think there is one ship that for the Americans is just simply better, which is the Massachusetts. Now, the Massachusetts obviously doesn't have a radar, so you won't be able to radar destroyers. However, its capabilities of being absolutely tanky and having secondaries to be area denial, I think is a lot more useful than the Missouri having a radar. In this game, I feel like towards the end, you will see, I think having the Massachusetts in this situation would have simply been a lot better because the secondaries would have been a lot more useful in comparison to having a radar. And then if we go the opposite direction, playing the Missouri at range, well, there's the Alabama and Kansas that both have a much higher Sigma, meaning that both of them have significantly better accuracy. The Missouri Sigma is actually 1.8, which is the same as the Iowa, Georgia, and also the Massachusetts. So again, going back to the Massachusetts, you will have similar accuracy if you use the same build. And then using accuracy commanders, well, you're better off using the Alabama or Kansas because they're just simply more accurate. And then if you're playing at a bit more range, you're not going to make much use out of your radar. So then again, what is the point of buying the Missouri for 30,000 steel that took so long to obtain? Now, the only reason I would say that the Missouri would be worth it is for any sort of competitive modes, which is ranked or even clan battles in the future, although we don't even have training rooms yet, or simply the clan feature, which I guess would be putting a clan tag. So we don't even know when really we would get those features added into this game, so we do have quite a bit of time before the Missouri is worth it. So ultimately, for those of you that are a bit strapped for steel, I think you should just save it. And if you do have quite a bit of steel to spend, because it has been some time that steel has been released, you can go ahead and get it. I don't think they're adding any steel ships anytime soon. But at the end of the day, like I always say, it is entirely up to you how to spend your hard-earned steel or any of the resources that you had to obtain. Now, moving on from the Missouri, we're getting to the part of why I just absolutely think Will to Rebuild should never have been added or implemented the way that it is. If you look at the top, it's a 6 versus 4. This should honestly be a really easy game to win, but you're going to see just how frustrating having to deal with Will to Rebuild Lemming Train users is actually going to be. And then also Missouri having higher shell velocity than the Iowa, which already has a fairly decent shell velocity. At close range, you're just going to simply overpen a bunch of cruisers, which is also a reason that I don't actually like the Missouri. Anyway, these three ships that you see in front of me, the Ochakov and two Georgia Ws, are all in a division, and all they really did this entire game was sit next to each other in Will to Rebuild, and ultimately they simply don't die. I think there honestly is a ton of other options that they could have done for Will to Rebuild, and honestly helping those dispersion or accuracy build commanders who were simply getting burnt down by cruisers extremely easily, especially not having any fire prevention skills and also having to use flammable cannoneer, which ultimately had them get 7 fire a lot more. Having Will to Rebuild be a lot more like Tetsuro, where it simply just gives you another repair party, I think honestly could have been the way to go if it simply gave you one more repair party and then also did the 110% of healing but then a 50% shorter duration. It honestly could have still been a very useful skill and helped the dispersion commanders be a lot more tanky and deal with the HE spam a lot better. Also, another thing that was added recently for battleships is the concealment mod in the third upgrade slot. Having the concealment mod added does allow you to disengage a lot more effectively, whereas before we didn't have it and battleship's concealment was basically around 15 kilometers, which was absolutely rubbish. You could simply not go undetected, especially with how close you spawned to the enemy ships. I'm not sure why it took so long, especially after they added it to the Japanese and ships like the Conqueror had the concealment mod. I think the concealment mod honestly should have been added at the very beginning of this game. There was no reason to only have the RGA mod. Now, as I come around this corner, I do have a broadside Georgia to shoot at. Unfortunately, we only get one Citadel, and I tactically beach because there is an Ochakov with them, and instead of simply pushing around into torpedoes and losing all my HP, I decided to see if I could bait out his torpedoes. Although we had a friendly gas can that was full HP that just simply charged into all three of them and ended up dying. And if you remember before, it was a 6 versus 4, which should have been an easy win. Aside from the enemy team having will to rebuild and simply not dying, I didn't exactly have the most intelligent of teammates. Someone charging into 3 ships, especially an Ochakov that has torpedoes, was not exactly the brightest play. Seeing that the enemy division is simply pushing into Charlie, I decide to try and get into the Bravo cap in order to contest it and flip it while trying to take care of the enemy division. And then if having a gas can yellow in, not do anything and die wasn't bad enough, we also have on the minimap and over there we have a friendly Kronstadt that was also full HP, just simply charging into this division. And well, he's just simply going to throw his ship away by closing the distance and allowing the Georgias to absolutely smash his ship, especially because the Kronstadt doesn't exactly have the best armor. Now, I do reverse far enough, and I'm actually able to get a shot at an angled Ochakov, which does grant us that Citadel, and we are able to finish him off, although there is still 2 Georges that is in will to rebuild. And, well, unfortunately, our Kronstadt goes down, so now all we have is our carrier to help us kill off these Georges. Now, after we finish off this Ochakov, and there's just these 2 Georgias, they are slightly angled, and we do fire a salvo. Our dispersion is fairly decent, and it looks like it's going to mostly land in the superstructure. We do get 2 pens and 3 overpens, and unfortunately, the Georgia survives. Now, this is actually the situation that I had mentioned earlier, where I think I probably would have been better off with a Massachusetts. Not only would there have been potential to actually Citadel the Ochakov earlier when he was sitting flat broadside at a relatively close range, but also being a bit more aggressive and having my secondaries help me finish off these battleships in Will to Rebuild, having the Missouri only relying on my main battery and essentially praying for a good salvo to absolutely chunk him for all of his HP at once. Just simply wasn't going to happen, especially using running with scissors. Although having the Massachusetts, I do use running with scissors on that as well, but having those secondaries help you out that little bit definitely makes a huge difference. Now, something I also thought about, if I were to be using a accuracy build commander, I probably would have done a lot more damage and also had a better accuracy salvo, although not being the tankiest ship, especially not having that many fire prevention skills, this simply would not have been the playstyle I would have played with. I most likely would have been a lot more passive and I wouldn't have found myself pushing in as aggressively as I did. So for a situation like this, I can't really put blame on the build. Ultimately, what it boils down to is the fact that my team wasn't exactly helpful, and then also these two having unlimited repair party by simply lemming around the map together, and then making a game that really should have been winnable, simply impossible to win. I think the most frustrating part of all of this is the fact that this game was extremely close, but then the enemy Georgias having will to rebuild and simply just healing through all of the damage that I was dealing to them just made all the chances that I actually had to bring this game back into a win. It just all disappeared because, well, we can't kill off two battleships that's just sailing around will to rebuild. And unfortunately, at this point in the game, our CV has also been deplaned, so he's not exactly able to deal an alpha strike that's going to kill them off, which is also unfortunate. But then again, if you look at the situation where they don't have will to rebuild, both of them definitely go down rather than just simply surviving. Which again, it all falls back onto the fact that will to rebuild, in my opinion, was just simply implemented poorly. Skipping ahead to the end of the battle, simply because those two Georges just keep sailing away and we're not actually able to kill them off. This game does end in a defeat, and I do nearly 2700 base XP, with a 50% win bonus. This would have been over 4000 base XP, which is really unfortunate. This was an absolute monster of a game in the Missouri, but then Will to Rebuild simply ruined the chances of this being a win, and then also adding a lot more salt onto this loss. This isn't the first time that Will to Rebuild has thwarted a win that I could have simply carried, and it definitely won't be the last. Although with some of the recent blog posts about Wargaming balancing carriers and saying that they've been listening to the community, I do have some hope that in the future Will to Rebuild will definitely be changed, especially going and thinking about competitive modes that they will be adding for clan features in the future. A skill that grants an unlimited repair definitely won't be something that will be welcomed into competitive play, especially when it does come to clans. At this point in time, all we can really do is hope that they'll actually change it and ultimately make this game a bit more enjoyable by giving battleship players a skill that they can use on the accuracy build commanders that gives them a little more survivability, but also not giving them a skill that is the busted will to rebuild. Going into the build that I used in this game, like I said, it was a full anti-air build, and then using Angelo Iachino and Andrew Cunningham as my inspirations. And then in the legendary skill roll, I've been using running with scissors, and depending on the commander, sometimes I do use fight fire with fire. Ultimately, I've been moving away from will to rebuild, because then I'm not going to be a hypocrite by saying will to rebuild is a busted skill, and then having myself use it. Although with how strong Will to Rebuild is, I am definitely putting myself at a slight disadvantage. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have for you in this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, leave a like and subscribe for more, and leave a comment down below for other ships you want to see in the future, and what are your thoughts on Will to Rebuild. But until next time, aloha.